everyone. Welcome to Security Confidential. This is Manoj Tandon, and today we have another very special guest, Dakota Rae. And Dakota has been in sales and marketing for quite some time, and she has a great resume. She was the youngest employee at the now #1 IT security firm in North America, the Herjavec Group. Dakota was later public in Robert Herchevic's best-selling novel, The Will to Win. And for those of you for whom the name may not be familiar, Robert is one of the sharks on Shark Tank. So that's quite an accomplishment. And then Dakota later moved on to a mid-sized tech integrator as director of strategic accounts, where she sold the largest deal in the company's 15-year history. The firm was later acquired by MNP. Dakota started Equation Sales in 2017 as she recognized a major gap in the industry for salespeople of the hunter mentality. EQ, Equation Sales, focuses on lighting revenue and reputation on fire for tech companies globally. Welcome to the show, Dakota. Glad to have you here.
Fantastic, Manoj. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Let's do it.
Absolutely. And you know, we know you're very successful because you, in fact, successfully sold us. So in full disclosure, we're a client of Dakota's, and she's been integral to the digital marketing program here at Dark Rhino. And we're just very glad that she's with us, and we're very glad to have her here.
Fantastic. Yes, very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So Dakota, I got to ask the question. I mean, you
Sure.
can't bring up a name like Robert Herchevick and then not ask some kind of a celebrity type question here.
Of course. No, go for it.
What was it like working with him?
Sure. Yeah. No, Robert. I mean, listen. As mentioned, I started my career at that company, and it was my first opportunity to learn anything and everything about business, and more importantly, about entrepreneurship, which I know we're going to touch on a little bit today. Robert, I mean, if there was one word for me to describe Robert, it would be ruthless, where I don't necessarily think people correlate that word in Robert based on, the episodes of Shark Tank where he's very endearing, and he absolutely is, but I think there's another side of him, as there's another side to all of us, where there's a time for seriousness and there's a time for play and fun. And so I think in terms of why the business was able to grow as quickly as it has and why it's now one of the market leaders is because of his approach to business and leadership, in that, he really led by example and was somebody who really pushed his team towards excellence. And that was something that was embedded kind of in day one. And so I learned a ton from him about work ethic. As well, I remember a few scenarios of going into the office very early, because I started my career in marketing there. Okay. And then pivoted into sales pretty quickly, because I realized, well, that's actually where the money is. And so I pivoted there pretty quickly. But I was, when I started in marketing and I was hosting events for the organization from a lead gen perspective, and I would go in early to set up some of those, and I would, at 6 in the morning go in, and he would have already, been in, went through emails, did a 5K run, ate breakfast. So getting his day started quite earlier before, any of us are rolling out of bed. And so that was something that I took away during my time at the Herjavec Group. So he was a great guy, to work with, to learn from, and it's good to see that the business is still thriving.
And do you think that you saw it firsthand with him, but maybe there were employees there that were a little bit more removed from him?
Sure.
But did his mindset and his ethic actually were they able to cascade down to other parts of the organization that may not necessarily interact with him?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think to the folks that work there today, and it's now hundreds and hundreds of employee count, I think they're quite removed in some respects. But luckily enough, I was able to start at the business when I believe there were 22 people, and I sat right outside of his office. And I was reported to him at one point directly. So I did get the opportunity to learn, the trickle down effect right away versus some of the other people who were a little more removed. And so I think, yeah, he was somebody who we hosted these pretty he hosted these pretty impactful kickoffs, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 kickoffs, where he would get up on stage and kind of rally everybody together and get everybody towards the common goal. So that's where, you know, at some points people thought, oh, some of the things that he's doing doesn't make sense, or they were kind of controversial, or, you know, maybe we shouldn't go down that route, and we were acquiring different businesses and people didn't understand it. But I think the one other thing I took away from him was he was going to do what he was going to do, regardless of how anybody else felt about it. And I think that's true leadership in a lot of ways, in the sense of, you know, going with your gut feel, knowing what's right. It's his name and business on the brand, so you know, he's going to do what he wants to do, and you're either in or you're in the way. It's kind of that simple.
And I can completely respect that, because we have a few elements of that going on in our own company. But you're absolutely right. Unless your name is on the door, it's very hard to know what that is like.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and you know, that actually gets to a thing of mindset, right?
Sure.
And you characterize yourself as a sales hunter. And I think before this podcast, I briefly mentioned I've had several sales jobs, and I, fortunately or unfortunately, always ended up in that sales hunting role, where it was always about net new business, trying to find fresh clients. And that, I think, is one of the singularly the hardest things to do in any organization. It's a non-trivial.
100%.
You have been now a sales hunter and an entrepreneur, both.
Sure.
What do you think is the difference between the mindset of the two?
Yeah, no, it's funny. That's a great question. And I think, you know, this is relevant for anybody in business, trickle down, anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur, and then anybody in sales. Like, I think this topic is so important. Because I think, you know, being of the hunter mentality, and I'll kind of give the example for folks who maybe don't know what we're talking about. You know, from a sales perspective, when you're looking to hunt down new logos or new business into the revenue into the organization, there's kind of two approaches, and there's something called farming and there's something called hunting. And so farmers are people who potentially we envied along the way.
Yeah, very much so. I always thought that was a cushy job, and I always wondered, how the heck do you get that gig?
Yeah, not sure. And so you have to be really, you just do a really shitty job at hunting, and then maybe you get the farming. Maybe then they give you it. I'm not sure. But on the farming side, you're kind of more of an account manager, where you're, you know, meeting with clients. It's more the relationship building, so to speak, and looking for opportunities that are existing. Where the hunter is looking down, you know, knocking down new doors for new business, new logos, etc. And I always found that that was an area that I did well in, but I think it dotted line back to just my competitive nature, and that I, you know, played a ton of sports growing up at the national level, both rugby and basketball. And so I felt that with that, I was a natural competitor. And so being, you know, being put in sales and then saying, oh, you know, kind of sit around or go out and get new business, naturally I fell into that bucket. And there was just more money in that bucket. So I went there. And then in that respect, I think from a hunting mentality and entrepreneurship, I think there's a ton of similarities in that people need to appreciate that being an entrepreneur, it's not a job, a part-time job.
Right.
It's a full-time job. It's a 24/7, 365, 36, you know, 5.55. It never stops. And I think it's one of those things that I learned, at least early on. Even I'll go back to Herjavec quickly. When I started there, I was taught that even within the organization, even as a salesperson or a marketing executive, truly, I was an entrepreneur of my own book of business. And I was responsible for my own book of business and was given the autonomy to do so. And I think that taught me and gave me the framework to then, you know, venture off eventually and start my own business. And so I was given the opportunity where a lot of people, I think, early on in a lot of their careers, whether it be in cybersecurity or in IT or any other facet, maybe aren't given as much autonomy. So I was given, I started in a pretty unique position. And so I'm thankful for that. But I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
One thing I noticed as you were speaking is a fundamental underlying common denominator that I hear you that you haven't said, but I think is there, is that you're very comfortable with getting out of your comfort zone.
For sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
Getting into sales hunting role, which is a very uncomfortable position in many ways, because you're right. You are on your own. You are very much on your own
Hmm.
in that playing field. So
Hmm.
being comfortable with getting out of your comfort zone seems to be a key character trait that might have lended itself to your success. And quite possibly, maybe it's something that other folks who out there who are listening to this podcast uh, should consider as part of their repertoire.
Absolutely.
Don't go with the comfortable,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 100%. And try new things, because the worst you could do is fail and then you move on. So
Well, see, that's so easy to say, but that fear of failure and fear of
mhm.
rejection is a very self-limiting
It
concept.
is. It is. Yeah, it is. It is. I remember the first time I was, given a book of numbers to reach out to and just call and dial for dollars. And I had never cold called before, like ever. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what if somebody hangs up on me? Like, oh my goodness, what if somebody tells me, whatever? And I was nervous initially starting off, and then my boss at the time just said, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? They could hang up on you. I'm like, I know. And they're like, yeah. And then you dial and call somebody else. Like, just normalize failure and that it's going to happen in some respects. And then just being able, it's not the kick in the ass, because you're going to get kicked. It's just get up and get up quickly. And that's really, I think, what it's about.
That is absolutely a mindset to go with.
For
You
sure.
can't you have to be willing to take that risk, and it's okay to fail.
Hmm.
And like one of the things we have done at Dark Rhino
Yeah.
is we don't encourage failure by any means,
Of
but we
course.
have said that our team members, they can fail safely. If there is
Hmm.
something that they want to try or they
Hmm.
really believe is the right thing to do for a client,
Yep.
by all means propose it and
Hmm.
try it.
Yep.
It may not always work, but you very likely could stumble upon something that is very meaningful. And that is how we've actually built some of our service offerings, and we learned the
Absolutely.
hard way.
Absolutely.
We screwed some things up and we did some things amazingly well. And the things that we did amazingly well, we looked at, well, what are we doing here? And let's build on that and forget
Exactly.
about the other stuff. That's
Exactly. But like, let's look at our space for instance, in the kind of tech startup scale up space. I mean, I think according to Forbes, almost 91 or 90% of startups fail, right? And why is that? Because they
right.
went for it, they tried something, and then they gave it their all, and they pivoted, and maybe it didn't work out, and they're on to the next project. Like, I don't know if people are as aware of that as maybe you and I are, in that because we're in the space, but the failure rate is high, because it's real, it happens.
It very much, but how much of that is actually warranted?
Exactly. And I think that, and when you look at, a lot of the money that's pumped into some of these businesses, the millions and millions and millions, I mean, we're bootstrapped, so I haven't raised any money for my business. But when I think about, all the millions of dollars out there that's being flowed to some of these tech startups and scale ups, why are they failing? Because they're not using the money appropriately. Money's barely the issue. They get the money. It's the know-how. It's, to your point, what are you bucketing the money to? And then how effectively is the people behind making those money decisions?
And we're
Right?
And where the rubber meets the road is exactly where you're at. Is this something that clients are willing to pay for? Are you
Exactly.
able to convince the market that they should buy
Hmm.
your service versus
Hmm.
competitor X? I think the last I checked, there's like over 1,000 MSSPs in
Hmm.
North America. That's a
Hmm.
lot of
Yep.
potential competition.
Absolutely.
So doing more of the same is going to probably put you into more of the same.
Exactly, exactly. And I think understanding kind of your differentiation, because I get there's not a ton of IP out there, and that we're creating something that's never existed. But what's your differentiator in terms of the value you bring? And I know that obviously, in working with you folks, it's really honing into the experience and the Dark Rhino experience in terms of what you bring to your clients as a unique differentiator. where are people talking about the experience and the people behind the machine? Because yes, cybersecurity is needed. And to your point, there's a lot of companies they could buy it from. But why people go with Dark Rhino is because of the experience on the back end. And so it's like understanding that as a differentiation, where I don't know if people lean into that enough, because in terms of understanding what their key differentiators are.
I would agree with you completely on that. So I got to ask, you know, someone with your skill set, you could have gone on to a very successful career in sales. You could have said, well, you know what, I'm going to go work at Microsoft or Palo Alto or IBM. Have your pick, right? Why do entrepreneurship? Why go from a steady paycheck to the potential of no paycheck at all?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's all actually a reality, right? And so, you know what? I think firstly, I wanted to make sure I understood the business before I ventured off and did anything. I think early on, I always knew I wanted to have my own business. So that was something I always knew. I always kind of felt that. I think that became a bit more truer as I spent time with, very successful seasoned entrepreneurs, like Robert Herjavec, like George Frempong, who's the co-founder of that business, like the other gentleman who I worked for, after Herjavec, and went to a small company called NCI and helped that business grow. And then later, but I think the common theme there quickly, if you haven't caught it, was all of the, successful men, all of these successful gentlemen that I worked for.
Right.
never women. and I don't know why that is. But it's tended to that throughout my career, that was the experience. And I felt that kind of leaning into the differentiation piece that I spoke to quickly, I was saying, there's not a lot of women in this space. And I think, I've carved out a niche in terms of kind of the hunter mentality, understand in cyber, because there's not a lot of women in cyber, as we know. And then, I said, I kind of found a value prop where I could add value to companies who don't necessarily have that skill set. And I just decided to go for it because I felt that I learned from the best. I, took away what I needed to take away from it. And now it was time to, do it for myself. And so that's why I kind of pivoted.
For you to go out there as a woman and as a hunter woman, more specifically on the sales and marketing side, that is an accomplishment and an achievement.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
And and I think I didn't really quickly for you, Manoj, didn't really notice the being a, women in tech or women in cyber. That didn't become a reality for me until I started my own business. So here's what I mean by that. Yeah. Organizations that I worked for, interestingly enough, the leadership that I had never made me feel as a minority in the group, and were giving me the same amount of opportunities that my men counterparts were given. So I never felt that, oh, I'm a woman, I'm disadvantaged, or I'm somebody who's not getting as much opportunity, or they're not taking me as seriously. That wasn't true in the first part of my career. I never really felt that. As I started my own business and started to venture off and have conversations with CEOs and founders of organizations to buy into my business as a woman, then the dynamic started to change a little bit. And that's when that's when I started to realize, oh, okay. So this is a bit of a disadvantage for me, because before it wasn't true. It didn't exist.
So tell me a little bit about that dynamic. Expand on that thought. What changed? What do you think is different? And what challenge, because of being a woman, what are some of the challenges you face that I might not face or somebody else may not face?
For sure. I think the major piece was, as I kind of dug into it and really recognized it, I think, yes, I was in senior roles as a director of sales for, certain a patch or a certain, geography, but it always dotted line back to, a man in terms of a CEO or somebody who was leading the organization. So the customer was still signing off on, yes, doing business with me, but there was that, corporate comfort touch of a man that disappeared when I started my own business, because I'm the CEO and founder. And so I think that started to be something that, it wasn't as prevalent, or isn't as prevalent now, more that I've built more of a reputation. But when I first started, it was something that I could tell I think just naturally, because in business, I think women aren't taken as seriously for whatever reason. I think they're just not taken as seriously as men, even though, 63, I think it was 63 or 64% of women-owned businesses are just as likely to IPO and get acquired and succeed if given capital. But yet we're not. And so, I mean, I could go on and on, but we're going to move on. But
No,
that's,
I mean,
but
those
it's
are all
just,
valid points because we feel very strongly that there should be more representation of women and of other diversified groups as well. If you're seeing that dynamic take place where there is a difference between men and women, how would you suggest to other women out there to maybe overcome some of these hurdles that they may encounter that their male counterparts won't? What
yeah,
would be your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I think, for women, I mean, there is a difference in terms of from a perception perspective. I want to say from a perception perspective, there's a difference between how business or how women and men are viewed in business. From a capabilities perspective, I don't think there's a difference. From an attitude perspective, I don't think there's a difference. I think from a perception, there's a difference in that women are seen as emotional, or can't be in charge of large teams, or or aren't as good at critical thinking, which I think is completely false. I think these are just myths that have floated around and people have bought into them. But I think, if I could leave anything with women, who are looking to kind of advance their career, I would say a few things. Number one, I think it's important to actually be yourself, and not try to fit into a mold of what you think you should do. And I think I fell into that trap early on. It didn't last long. It lasted maybe a couple of months where I thought, oh, I have to look this way, I have to dress this way, I have to talk this way, because that's professional and that's what's going to make people think I'm serious. But what I realized, and I learned this at the Herjavec Group, was impact isn't heard, it's felt. So if you want to make an impact, let your actions show that you can add value, and then everybody will take you seriously. And so I kind of leaned into that to say, as a woman, it's kind of getting in your mindset to say, use being a woman, number one, is your advantage in that, in cyber and in tech, because there's not a lot of you. So it's already a differentiation, number one. And then number two, less overcompensating in your own mind and more just showing your value, and what you can bring to the table. And then in turn, that will make people take you seriously. Yes, you'll have to work a little harder than your male counterparts, because you have to get over that perception wall. But once you show value, like, nobody cares. I don't care if you're green, yellow, 12, 16, 25, like, it doesn't matter. If you're showing value, you're showing value. And let's continue. And so I think that's important for women to lean into, is making sure that you're showing value, less talking, more doing. And once you do, then you'll show everybody that you're to be, reckoned with.
It's very interesting that you independently make this comment, because on last week's podcast, we had Karen Huff on. Karen's a CEO, and she's a very successful best-selling author of Improv Edge. And one of the tenets of her theme is that you should be very comfortable with yourself and be yourself.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And if you are yourself, as uncomfortable as that may be to you on your own, because of what you described, there's a perception that I got to dress a certain way, act a certain way, do XXX a certain way. That's not going to benefit you. But if you are yourself, it's going to carry you a long way. And I think maybe that is the first step in getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Exactly.
So first, be yourself to begin with, because that may be discomfortable for some people.
For some, for sure. But I think just being your authentic self is important, because it'll allow you to, number one, not have to carry on some kind of facade that eventually you're going to get bored of yourself. And people are going to call you out on it eventually, because it can't go on forever. So I think you should just 100% be yourself. And and people who are interested in working with you or helping you will. And if they're not, then they're not, and that's okay, because there's a lot more opportunity out there. So
agreed. That's a very, very positive way to look at things. So I
for
gotta
sure.
ask you, like in this different dynamic between men and women,
Yeah.
especially as you are approaching a lot of other CEOs and executives out there, is there
Mhm.
a difference in the way men and women negotiate?
I think, for me, I've always been somebody who, again, was at least given the platform to be myself. And then I kind of leaned into that all the way. In terms of, I think I had this conversation with you before, like the way that I kind of communicate or articulate myself is sometimes branded as, forward or direct, where if a man were to communicate that way, it's just like, oh, Johnny's the best. He's just sold the deal. He's a great guy. Where if I do it, it can be perceived as something negative. And where I think that's where you have to get to a level with yourself to say, I'm going to be who I am genuinely. And if people are attracted to that and they're okay with that dialogue, then fantastic. And if they're not, that's okay too. Then we're going to move on. But I'm not going to change the way that I communicate. I think women, the perception again is that women feel that they need to be a little bit softer or a little more hand-holdy during the process because they don't want to come off as being bitchy, or I don't know if I can say that
Right, you could say that.
on here. Don't want to be viewed as
No,
being,
no, you can
given
say that on this show.
that,
That's okay.
given that tag, where I think it's important to say, hey, if a man were to do that, would he be labeled? No. So then I just have to continue on my path, and bulldoze whoever out of the way if they don't like it, and that's just is what it is.
So, there's you've probably heard that old adage, entrepreneurship or business is 100% perspiration and 1% lady luck, right? Given what given what you have experienced, do you think that that's actually in a real equation for success, or would you tilt things a little differently there?
Yeah, it's funny because I think luck is one of those things that it's a very controversial topic, right? And I've been called lucky a lot in my life from people who didn't necessarily understand me or know my background or know my story. And I'm not a big fan of the word luck because I think that luck is one of those things that happens to people after the work's been put in, right? So I think you have to put in the effort and the energy and the work, to your point, before luck comes. So I'm not a big believer in luck and fluff. It's just my perception or my opinion, I guess. But in terms of work ethic, I think people don't understand the amount of effort and time that goes into building a business and goes into entrepreneurship. I think it's kind of the sexy, fun thing to do right now, especially within the millennial group. And I can say that because I'm a millennial.
Okay.
So I'll say that in that I think it's kind of the fun thing to do. It's the cool thing to do, but not truly understanding behind the scenes of what it actually means. And I think that's a group of people on two sides. I want to say something because I'm experiencing this now, even bringing on people to my business. And throughout the summer, we had like an internship program and brought people in. And what's interesting is about the millennial group, and God love them because I'm a part of it, but oh boy, sometimes this group, this special group, has a very different perception of the workplace and of value than I do. Just because, and I had the opportunity to grow up, I say, or in terms of from a work perspective, from a career
So
perspective.
please do tell in more detail. Like how so?
This is fun one for me too. But yeah, so I had the opportunity, obviously, working at the Herjavec Group at NCI at such a young age and kind of coming up. I wasn't given, the millennial thing wasn't really a thing at that point. In terms of being aware of the tap on the shoulder and the validation and the making people feel good and all of those fun things, which I think are important, but I don't think is something that is 90% of the employer's responsibility. This is my take on it. I think millennials as a whole, I think validation is important, promotion is important, pay increases at an exorbitant rate
Right.
are important. And I think if I could give any advice to this millennial group trying to excel in their career and or in entrepreneurship, I think to my point earlier about adding value, I never got a raise that I asked for, ever. I was given raises because of my work effort in terms of the value that I brought to the table. And so in my career, and I'm not saying that's for everybody, I'm just making it clear that when I showed value, I was being brought in to, the CEO's office and given increases. It wasn't the reverse. And I think that's something that the millennial group needs to be aware of. I'm not saying you need to copy that verbatim, but I'm just saying it's important to show value to the organization that you're working for before, before the ask list comes out. And that's something that I'm, even within my own business, having fun with. And so it's
so I guess I'll say the politically incorrect thing here. Do you think that there's a sense of entitlement maybe in that demographic?
Completely. There's a complete sense of entitlement, and within the millennial and the Gen Z group. And again, and I'm saying this as I am part of the millennial group and not I'm in the mid tier. So I feel good about saying this and that I'm living it, but I also am experiencing it as starting a business. And I think, that group has to do themselves some favors in that, prove your value through your work and bring some, something to the table before raising your hand and asking for additional things, because that in itself will be such a differentiator that the businesses that you're working for will naturally, have you, if they're smart, will have you excel and succeed because you're less of a headache. I think, what I was given too as a point of advice early on in my career is, do you know how, you're adding value, Dakota? Do you know how you're making life easier? Is if you and I aren't constantly talking and you don't need my constant guidance, then you're adding value to my life. But if I'm constantly talking to you, there's a problem.
So that's a very good way to look at it. I actually hadn't thought of it that way, but that's a new perspective.
Yeah. And I think if you're just saving, people time, saving money, saving time, saving headaches, then if you're doing that, it's like I say this to some of the people that I bring on too. It's like it's less of the intangibles. It's more about the intangibles than the tangibles for me, because I can teach you how to A, B, C, D, and the list goes on, but I can't teach you how to work hard, how to show up on time, and how to not be a headache. Like I can't teach you those things. those are core. Either you have them or you don't.
That right? What you are saying is exactly pretty much to a T some of the words that have been uttered in our board meetings. Like we can teach somebody a skill.
Yes.
Right. We can't teach someone how to behave.
Yes.
And have those soft skills of being likable, interactive, motivated, honest, dependable.
Yes.
Those skills are inside of you and they're a part of who you are as a being.
Yes.
Or they're not. And
exactly.
And in a high-tech business, and especially, I would say we're kind of maturing out of that startup stage now, but we still don't have the energy or the time as an executive team to micromanage everybody.
Exactly.
In fact, it becomes it does become a huge effort if you have to micromanage someone. It's 100%. It's not a fun place to be. You don't want team members that you have to micromanage. You want people to be independent, and if they can get that sense of direction and then they go off on their own.
Yep.
Rock and roll. Then you've got a team. Now you've got a band and you can make music and you're going to be successful. If you don't, and you're trying to manage every aspect of human behavior and interaction with your client set in the market, I think you'll be exhausted and you'll probably die before the finish line is ever reached. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, this kind of, and it's interesting. You've described a few things here, and I'm going to try and from memory here talk about it. Impact should be felt. That's a key thing, right? Add value. be yourself.
Mhm.
Be comfortable with tackling the uncomfortable. There should be no, failure shouldn't be looked upon as as an end all and be all. If something
Exactly.
goes wrong, it goes wrong. Get up and move on, right?
Yeah.
And then I look at the name of your company, Equation Sales. So is that, give us a little insight. Is this the equation in Equation Sales, or what's the ideation behind this?
Sure,
Right?
sure. Yeah. And listen, and I wish, hey, if I had the secret sauce to success, I'd be a multi-billionaire with a B. So today I don't have that. But I think what we're doing as a company is working towards a framework to solve what we call our clients' effectiveness equation. Because I think, to truly enable scale, you need some type of process, right, in place to truly enable scale. And what I mean by that is so that not just Dakota and Manoj can go and do it, it's that, Sarah, Dan, Mike, everybody on your team can go and do it. And how do you give them the resources to do that? It's by learning quickly in a competitive marketplace, because obviously, as you mentioned, there's, 1,000,001 other MSSPs out there. So how do you learn quickly and pivot to kind of gain market share? And so really at Equation Sales, what we're looking to do is find out, what we call is your effectiveness equation. So, effectiveness equals what you're saying to the market. So your messaging, your content, your materials, your value prop, plus how you say it, meaning the method of delivery. So is it through email, through call, through LinkedIn, social, all those fun things, or a combination of all, divided by the decision maker, meaning who you're saying it to as a business, who are you talking to? Was it directors of IT, CISOs, CIOs, et cetera?
Right.
And then squared, meaning the cadence of how many touch points it takes to get a yes, but equally, how many touch points does it take to get a no? Because no's are also important, that nobody likes to talk about in sales, but getting a no is just as valuable to me, so that I can equally, quickly pivot to get the yes. And so that's what we're doing, for tech companies, layer down cyber, because we have a skill set in cyber companies. That's really what our focus is.
So let's trade some statistics here. How many touch points do you think it takes to get, in your experience, does it take to get a yes? And I'll share our
Yeah.
real world example with that.
And it's great because obviously for our business, we're a sales and marketing company. So our outreach is fundamentally different than obviously, Dark Rhinos would be,
Right.
and some other organizations. But in general, I want to say in tech, that's broad. So let's go cyber. I think what we're seeing kind of across the board is about, 5 to 7 touch points in order. And let's define a yes. Is yes like yes to a meeting, or is yes, I'm signing a deal?
I'm saying yes to signing a deal.
Yes to signing a deal. So yeah, cyber, I'd say for a lot of our clients across the board, that's like mid-teens. So 12 to 14, 15 touch points. And here's what I mean by that. BDR, so starting at the beginning of the sales cycle, from
Right.
finding the lead list, reaching out to somebody, sending an email, doing a cold call, getting him on the phone or getting him on a LinkedIn message or email. After you do that, do a demo. And so here's where a lot of companies go wrong in the demo process. This is my opinion. And even because I buy software all the time, like for our company,
Right.
and oh my goodness, the dragging of the feet. Like I'm raising my hand saying, I want to buy, and I'm interested in buying. And the amount of, I think, just procedural steps they make me go through. I have to do a 15-minute discovery call. And then I have to do a 30-minute demo. And then after that, I have to do part 2 of the demo with a sales engineer. And then I have to overcomplicate the process in a lot of respects. And I know in cyber, obviously, there's some things that are a lot more technical, so it might require those additional touch points. But I think the other thing where companies go wrong are salespeople, particularly in cyber, because who you're reaching out to are stakeholders that are CIOs and CSOs, and they're busy,
Right.
and their dates could change the next day. So it's setting the touch point on the phone live with them is to say, okay, we're in this demo, but the next time we're going to do a proposal review, as an example, is going to be next Thursday. Does that work for you? And then book the time live. Because if you get off and do the email back and forth, you're going to be waiting.
I agree. You know,
Yeah,
and I'll tell you, in our business, our experience has been on average, it's about 24 touch points to get a deal.
24. Okay, okay.
At
But
Dirt
do you
Rhino.
can, okay,
Now
okay,
that's from very beginning. That is from, I'm going to count that from the first BDR action, whether that was an email sent or a
okay.
call made or whatever happened.
Are you counting
From
like emails back and forth in that?
yes.
Okay, got it. So it's like more
So,
granular.
well,
Okay.
but I'm going to group emails, like emails on a particular topic. But typically, we've seen 24, and I think that we could actually take easily a half a dozen steps out of that.
For sure.
And I think part of that is salespeople are afraid to ask the hard questions
Mm-hmm.
because people
Yes.
don't like hearing no. And I personally, like just today,
Yeah.
this morning, I took a sales call from a company that does lead lists and things of
Mm-hmm.
that nature. And there's a billion of them out there,
Yeah.
right? That you can't. I don't know how many people out there do that work, but but I took the call because the guy was very professional. You know, he
Sure.
reached out to me on LinkedIn and he said,
Yep.
"Hey, look, I kind of get from looking at your website and some of the customers you're advertising, this is kind of your customer space.
Yeah.
And I think I have a unique approach for your customer space."
Okay.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
So I took the call, but the thing was, we got right to the end point. I said,
Mm-hmm.
he had this PowerPoint deck and all this. Like, dude, I don't got the time for this.
No.
Right.
Yep.
And I know
Yep.
you're going to feel bad that your company went through all this trouble to create the logo and the PowerPoint and all these great things.
Yep.
Tell me, get to the heart of this matter. If I do business with you, what
Mm-hmm.
will change for me tomorrow?
Exactly.
And he was not
Exactly.
expecting that question.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I love that question. That's great.
You know, he just was not expecting that. And I said, you should go in. And if I was him, I would have turned around and asked me some very difficult questions. I said,
Exactly.
hot shot, let's, you know,
Yeah.
let's have this conversation now. And I would open the door to him. But it misfired a little bit. And I
Sure.
think that is an example of salespeople. I don't know why. Maybe again, it's, oh my God, what if they say no? And what if I only have 5 sales cycles going and now I don't have enough
Yeah.
people? But you got to ask those. I would say ask the hard, ugly questions as
Immediately.
quickly as
No,
possible
immediately.
in the sales possible.
And the sales, and it's so funny you say that. So quick story. I missed my first President's Club, my first year at the Herjavec Group. I missed quota.
Okay.
And it was devastating. I was so pissed off. I got to watch everybody go to Dominican Republic, all expenses paid trip. And I was like 15 or 12 points off of quota. It was something stupid. And I had deals in the pipeline to get me over. Why I didn't, as you know, everybody came back, you know, tanned and excited in January, and I got to sit down with my boss at the time, who's the co-founder of the Herjavec Group, George, and we sat down and we went through, you know, why did you miss quota? Like what was going on? And it was very simple. It was, to your point, I was afraid at the time, it was my first year in sales, to ask the hard questions. Why I was afraid is because I thought, oh, I don't want to piss anybody off, and I want them to like me, and you know, all of these things. Where now I'm, you know, it's the complete opposite of that in terms of my approach. But I think when I look at, you know, what George said to me, and I've leaned into this throughout my career for salespeople, is if a client is or a prospect is interested in doing business with you and they're serious, there's nothing you can say to them. Nothing you can say outside of insulting them, right? There's nothing you could say to them, no question you could ask to deter them from doing business with you. And if you
Right.
ask a question like, Mr. Customer, can you sign this deal on Friday or Monday? What works better? And they get pissed off, they weren't serious from the beginning. And so move on. And
Right.
so that's all it was. It was like just understanding if somebody's serious about doing business with me, like if somebody's serious about dating me, they're not going to be pissed off that I asked them a simple question,
Right.
right? Like it's just, if they're serious, they're
Well, you
serious.
would hope.
You would hope. Or if they drop you and they move on, then you're like, that wasn't really serious anyways, who cares? So I think it's important as a salesperson to ask those questions. That's another thing Robert would talk about a lot. You're a salesperson. they know you're there to sell them something. It's not a mystery.
Right.
Like, it's not a mystery. They know you're there to sell them something, sell it, ask for the sale. And if they say no, move on. Like because there's a lot of opportunity out there. And so I think that's something that stuck with me and why we've been able to grow as a business, because we're not spending time with people who aren't serious. We're moving on. And I think that's why.
That is a very good bit of advice.
Thank
Ask the hard
you.
question and move the heck on.
Exactly.
One of the things that I have seen, at least now having been a part of 5 different startups, is that there's a lot of companies that probably do themselves a disservice by even having a sales team to begin with. They're not ready for it.
I agree with you 100% there. And I think it's one of those things, particularly in cybersecurity. Like, I find this quite interesting because there's very eager to kind of get the salespeople in. I think prematurely, and I've seen this a lot with existing clients as well as prospects and people in the industry that I know that have businesses. I think it's one of those things where cybersecurity firms or just tech firms have to, in some ways, eat their own dog food, in that, you're asking businesses to outsource their cybersecurity because it's not core to them. It's not their core competency. So outsource, your sales and marketing, and that it's not core and integral to your business. You don't need to bring it in-house. It's not needed, at least initially. And over time, I think it'll be appropriate as you bring in revenue. But I think that's where they make a mistake. And moreover, you can outsource for cheaper and get somebody else to learn for you, so that when you do bring somebody in, they're not banging their head up against the wall, not knowing what to do. They're actually actioning things. That's where people go wrong. And that's where, from a sales and marketing perspective, that's a lot of the learning, which is annoying, time consuming, but needed. That's a lot of what we take on for clients is that piece. So that when they're ready, it's like, oh, there you go. And then we can work with you on other things. So I think that's an area that's required.
Well, Dakota, I mean, that's you're absolutely right, and we can personally comment to that fact that you do a good job of that. So
Thank
we're all
you.
appreciative. We're appreciative of that. But
Thank you.
Any parting words? Any
Sure.
last thoughts that you would want to
Sure.
for our listeners?
Yeah, I think, we talked a bit today in terms of entrepreneurship and women in business or women in cyber as well. I think, there's a woman who I've been following recently, Teresa Paint, and I don't know if you know who that is.
I'm not familiar with her.
Okay, so she's the CEO of this company called Fort Alice. She was the former CIO at the White House during the George W. Bush administration. So a very senior person in cybersecurity. But you and I, pre this call, were not very aware of her. And why is that? I think there is a lot of women in cyber security, but we're maybe not as privy to the information because they're not propped it up as much. And so I would say to women who are looking to get into cybersecurity, I think there are quite a bit of women in the space. So don't be deterred by thinking, oh, it'll only be me. I think there are, and it's becoming more prevalent. And it's a market that, like, let's look at coronavirus as an example, not to talk about it, but just quickly. Cybersecurity in this industry is something that is, recession and pandemic proof. It will never go away. It'll only grow. And what a time to be in cybersecurity. So I think if there's, an industry that you are sitting down thinking about what I could potentially get into, this is such a great industry in terms of growth opportunity. And then separately, I would just say, with only like 7% of there being women CEO, like heads of Fortune 500 companies in North America, only 7%. So there's a long way to grow and a long way to go. But I would say, I want to thank, obviously, the folks at Dark Rhino for partnering with me at Equation Sales as a CEO, woman founder. And I think you guys are, from that cause, obviously allies and obviously advocates for and buying into the fact that women can do what men do too. And so I appreciate that. And looking forward to, continuing to working with you guys. But yeah, that's it. I just want, thank you for the time. And I think for anybody who wants to chat, they can always connect with me on LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you so much for having me today.
Well, thank you for being here. And we're going to put the connections to your LinkedIn profile and to your company in the description. All right.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.